a lot of people sort of fetishize the single vineyard, single grape, more micro. But what about blends? So I'm going to take a contrarian opinion and stance tonight that would argue that blends are where it's at. But I'd like to know what you think. Blends versus single grape or single vineyard. What are your favorites? What have you tried in the past that just knocked your socks off in either category? So, blends versus single vineyard. There is that traditional snobbery that a single grape or vineyard is better than a blend. And I think that's because most of us started buying wine, at least in North America, according to the name of the grape. That's how we got to know wines, because we didn't have that European heritage of growing up and knowing that a Bordeaux is a Cabernet blend or a Burgundy is always a Pinot Noir. We didn't learn it that way. So we learned to buy wine based on Cabernet when it was written on the label, or Chardonnay. These grapes were brand names to us.
Do you have a thirst to learn about wine? Do you love stories about wonderfully obsessive people, hauntingly beautiful places, and amusingly awkward social situations? Well, that's the blend here on the Unreserved Wine Talk podcast. I'm your host, Natalie McLean, and each week I share with you unfiltered conversations with celebrities in the wine world, as well as confessions from my own tipsy journey as I write my third book on this subject. I'm so glad you're here. Now pass me that bottle, please, and let's get started. Welcome to episode 61. In today's episode, I'm chatting with you about the power and problems with wine scores, whether single vineyard or blended wines are better, and the viral sensation of the Manga wine series called Drops of God. This conversation first aired on my regular Facebook Live video show that you can catch every second Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern, including tonight, if you're listening to this podcast on the day it's published. During the Facebook chat, Peter Humphreys, one of my wine course student stars, makes an excellent point about blended wines, and I quote him on that. I'll put a link in the show notes where you can find us this evening at nataliemclean.com/61. It's so much fun. We chat, we drink, we laugh, we drink some more. Pour yourself a glass and join us. You can also join me on my free online video wine class called The 5 Wine and Food Pairing Mistakes That Can Ruin Your Dinner and How to Fix Them Forever. It's more fun than a mouth should be allowed to have. Go to nataliemclean.com/class and choose a time and date that work for you. I look forward to seeing you there. Okay, on with the show.
Why has the Drops of God Manga series, and I'm going to explain what that is if you don't know, spiked wine sales in North America? It's just gone crazy, this Manga series, otherwise known as anime, and I'm going to tell you the difference, but it's really caused a ripple in the wine industry. Number 2, are blended wines better, worse, or on par with single grape or varietal or single vineyard wines? And finally, I switched out my third topic here because I just found it more timely to talk about wine scores. So, to whet your appetite, especially those of you who might be here in Ontario, the wine submission got a 96 points score or rating from the Toronto Star, priced at less than $20. I'll share with you what my score was at the end. All right, so let's dig into this, starting with Manga. So, The Drops of God is the title of a series of 44 Japanese manga or graphic novels. Some people think of them as comics. I think there's a difference between comics and graphic novels. And their counterpart is anime. So that's when it is turned into TV or movies. Visually, they're very similar. I wish I could describe it, but I'm not sure I have the words. To me, it looks like very visually rounded graphics of people with beautiful big eyes, but definitely, for lack of a better word, like cartoons and comics, but more beautiful visually. So the Drops of God has caused quite a stir in the wine industry because the wines that are mentioned in these 44 graphic novels are selling out really quickly. But let me give you some more background on this. I find this really interesting. It's a social trend, it's a cultural thing. So I wanted to dig into it to find out what's going on because it's really sending a little bit of a tremor through the wine world. So, Drops of God, the authors are a brother and sister team. I'm going to probably not pronounce this correctly, but Shin and Yoko Kabashi, who wrote under the pseudonym Tadashi Agai, and then they worked with an illustrator, Shu Okimoto. They've published 44 books, which have been translated just recently into English through Amazon. And here's the core of the story, which I just love. Two half-brothers, both of whom want to inherit their father's $20 billion wine collection. Yeah, you heard that right. Their father's wine collection is worth $20 billion. And here's how they're going to inherit it. It's a competition. And the winner is determined by naming the 13 rare wines correctly that their father has laid out for them. So one brother is a sommelier, trained, and the other isn't, but he has a super, super keen sense of smell and taste, which he connects to emotions. So you've got the classic battle between the brain and the heart. It's really cool. They have 300 million readers in Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan. And now they're launching into North America, into the United States first. So these graphic novels teach people, the readers, a lot about wine, but in an entertaining way. It's very apparently gripping and it's a page turner. The difference between, by the way, manga and anime. Manga is the print version. So you can call them graphic novels or comic books. And then anime is either television or movies. They reflect the same thing with a visual aesthetic that's very similar, but that's why we have the two words for them. So in this case, Drops of Gods has a television show, and whatever wines they feature on that show, the wines really sell out quickly. And the two siblings first fell in love with wine at a tasting of, get this, Domaine Romani Conti. Way to start it off with a bang. I love some of their descriptions of wines. So they described a Pinot Noir from Burgundy, not DRC, but another one, as like chasing butterflies in a forest. Isn't that poetical and whimsical? So they've also launched an online wine club that features the wines that are in the books as well as the author's favorites. They host blind tasting games. They're sort of like tournament-like blind tasting rounds. And the winners who guess the names correctly of the wines win rare bottles of Bordeaux and Burgundy, like the two sons, kind of following their narrative. They have a wine salon, which is an interactive wine club that they say is inspired by the salons of the Renaissance in 1930s Paris. And that's when people gathered for conversation and drinks and that sort of thing. Here's something neat. They have a palate quiz because they want people to have an inquisitive approach to wine rather than relying on what they call authoritative voices. That would be critics, by the way, wine writers, aka yours truly. They want to engage the right side of the brain, the creativity part. And so based on your answers to the palate quiz, they send you wines. I find that's kind of intriguing. So you answer this palate quiz, and based on that, you get a different shipment of wine versus other people. What's really cool is it's a subscription of $300 per 6 wines shipped quarterly. And the wines are based on 4 elements: heaven, which represents the weather and climate; earth, which refers to terroir, that fancy wine term for climate and soil; man refers to winemaking and cellaring; and marriage is about wine and food pairing. So they're integrating these 4 elements into their wine choices that are reflective of the books themselves. A concierge also helps you find wines that are not available in the club's lineup. There's pop-up tastings, a forum for members to share stories. And they had pretty frou-frou launch events. One was at Thomas Keller's Ad Hoc restaurant in Yountville. He has Per Se. And another one in Beverly Hills at Bazaar. There's also live streaming events with tastings hosted by the authors themselves because they believe that wine is as much a story as it is a beverage. I find all of these cultural trends, how people are trying to tie in the social connection of wine with its consumption and sales, very intriguing. I'm going to go on to my second topic, which is blends of wine versus single varietal or grape, like a Malbec, a Cabernet, or a single vineyard estate. So, of course, a lot of people sort of fetishize the single vineyard, single grape, more micro. But what about blends? So I'm going to take a contrarian opinion and stance that would argue that blends are where it's at. But I'd like to know what you think. Blends versus single grape or single vineyard. What are your favorites? What have you tried in the past that just knocked your socks off in either category? So, blends versus single vineyard. There is that traditional snobbery that a single grape or vineyard is better than a blend. And I think that's because most of us started buying wine, at least in North America, according to the name of the grape. That's how we got to know wines. Because we didn't have that European heritage of growing up and knowing that a Bordeaux is a Cabernet blend or a Burgundy is always a Pinot Noir. We didn't learn it that way. So we learned to buy wine based on Cabernet when it was written on the label, or Chardonnay. These grapes were brand names to us. The follow-out or the follow-up of that today is that single vineyards are very fashionable. They're sort of hip and artisanal, like micro brews in beer. So the more specific, the more micro you can get, the better somehow, the more pure, the best expression of, a 5-centimeter plot. But I would argue, no, that's not the case. Let me tell you a few significant facts and stats that might change your mind as well. Blends can also come from one vineyard, field blends. So the traditional method of planting vineyards, like I'm talking centuries ago, was not to plant only one grape. It was to plant a variety of grapes. And that's what they mean by field blends. So when they harvested it all, they weren't bringing in just Cabernet or Pinot, and we're talking about the most coveted vineyards. They were bringing in a real variety of grapes. If you value tradition, history, a lot of the most coveted vineyards are field blends of many grapes. But let's go even down a notch further. Even grapes themselves, one single grape, are often not just one type or variety. For example, there are 350 different clones of Pinot Noir. And they can be planted, like several, maybe not all 350, but several can be planted in one vineyard. So what do blends give you? I argue that they give you better balance and layers of flavor, better diversity of flavor, and even more complexity, because you've got different components contributing to the overall sum of the parts, if you will. It's not a direct analogy, but it's like cooking with many different spices or ingredients versus relying on one spice. Now, if we think about benchmark blends, we need to look no further than Champagne and Bordeaux. Both of those wines are blends, as you probably know. Champagne is a blend of not just the grapes, and the grapes being usually Chardonnay, Pinot Noir, and sometimes Pinot Meunier, but they're often a blend of vintages in the non-vintage wines. The non-vintage champagnes are considered the house style and the hardest to produce because you want a consistent house style year after year, even in poor vintages. So mastering that blending in the cellar, is really pure artistry. It's almost like having a diversified financial portfolio. Do you want to put all your stocks in oil and gas? Probably not a good analogy right now. You want a diverse portfolio. And I think that works with blends. I love how some wineries change their blends from year to year. You know who's famous for that is Stratus. He can have up to like 17 different grapes in his red blend or even sometimes in his white blend. And he's picking which grape did better this year, like which stock did better this year. Was 2019 a better year for Chardonnay versus Gewürztraminer? And he'll blend them all. I usually prefer a blend unless the single vineyard is just stellar. Even really good vineyards in excellent vintages can benefit from a little tweaking from a gifted winemaker. Just 2 to 5% of something else can make a difference. You know what? That is so astute, Peter, because the traditional Rhone reds or Syrah in the Rhone Valley, very traditional, even if it's mostly Syrah, to have 2 or 3% Viognier, a white grape in a red blend, to give that floral lift mid-palate. And it just, that little lick, you wouldn't think, what's 2 to 3% going to do? But it actually makes a big difference. It's really amazing. So just consider that even most grower, those single vineyard, single site champagnes are blends, even within those single sites. And of course, Bordeaux, Chateau Margaux, Chateau Lafite, Latour, they're all blends of up to 5 grapes, as we know: Cabernet Sauvignon, Cabernet Franc, Merlot, Petit Verdot, and Malbec. No one would argue that those are second-rate wines. Even Penfolds Grange, the iconic flagship Australian wine, is a blend of regions. It's like really diverse, multi-regional wine. But somehow I think we're kind of stuck on the premise that a single grape or a single vineyard of a single grape is more representative of terroir, that climate and soil. Perhaps it is, but I'm not sure that's the be-all, end-all. So, open for discussion, as is everything else. My third and final topic is wine scores. We had Submission, a California Cabernet, which sold out like within hours because the Toronto Star critic gave it, I think, 96 points. This is a wine that's less than $20. There's also been an Italian reviewer that is starting to come on the scene, at least in terms of being quoted in the LCBO, and he's giving out a lot of 98s. So I just want to share with you my review of Submission. First, I should probably tell you, I'm not going to reveal the name of my reader here, but I received this note from a reader. He says, Submission Cabernet Sauvignon was featured in yesterday's Vintages release. It was promoted in the Toronto Star with a score of 96. Let's see, the wine sold out yesterday on the first day of its release. I managed to get a couple bottles and tried it yesterday evening. It was absolutely terrible. I noticed that you didn't give it a very high rating, and let me share with you the rating I did give it. As I said, the Toronto Star gave it a 96. I gave it an 87, and this is my review. Very sweet chocolate, mocha, and coffee aromas on the nose and palate of this generously oak-aged wine, and that is a euphemism, had a lot of oak. Supple and smooth, finishes very sweet as well. Almost a dessert wine here with milk chocolate and whipped vanilla cream. Pair with chocolate dip biscotti. So, anyway, that's my review. I should probably take a deep dive into wine reviews in a future chat, because I think that might be very helpful. But this was just so newsy coming up lately. It's been on a lot of blogs and social media, and I'm just getting a lot of emails from my readers. I will go into a deep dive on my scoring in the future. Take care. See you next week. Bye for now.
Well, there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this chat. If you liked this episode, please tell a friend about it, especially one who's interested in the wine tips I shared. My podcast is easy to find whether you search Google on its name, on Reserve Wine Talk, or on my name. You'll find links to the wines I mentioned, the video version of this conversation, and how you can join us on Facebook Live this evening for a terrific wine chat in real time, and always with wine, in the show notes at nataliemclean.com/61. Finally, if you want to learn why red wine should not be your default pairing for many cheeses, join me in a free online video class at nataliemclain.com/class. Next week, we'll chat with Jamie Evans, known as the herb sommelier, who talks about pairing wine and weed. Yes, cannabis. Now that it's legal in Canada and in many U.S. states, are you curious like I am about the combination and the similarities between them? We'll find out next Wednesday. Thank you for taking the time to join me here. I hope something great is in your glass this week. Perhaps a spectacular single vineyard or blended wine. You don't want to miss one juicy episode of this podcast, especially the secret, full-bodied bonus episodes that I don't announce on social media. So, subscribe for free now at nataliemclain.com/subscribe. Meet me here next week. Cheers.